You're making me angry.
Oh, am I?
Truth is, I am Iron Man.
Hello and welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi, where we journey through the many subgenres of science fiction on screen. I'm Matt.
And I'm James, and in this series we're exploring the sci-fi subgenre of mad science. And in today's episode we'll be looking at Hulk from 2003 and Iron Man from 2008.
Yeah, the mad science of superheroes is the focus in today's episode. And we got some turn of the century superhero sci-fi from the kind of early days of the MCU, the pre-MCU and the early days of what we now know as the juggernaut of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, looking at a couple of scientists from Marvel Comics that made their way to the big screen and have become quite iconic, I would say, because now everybody knows these superhero characters. I think maybe before the 2000s, not everyone would have been as au fait with Iron Man, per se. I think Hulk's been a character that people have known for years and years. He's a big green giant. He's very angry. You wouldn't like him when he's angry. He's very iconic. But I think Iron Man was a character that really sort of shot to prominence after the film was released in 2008.
Yeah, he was a bit of a loose end character that Marvel made into, obviously, the centerpiece of their massive cinematic universe. But yeah, a bit more legacy in the Hulk world. But both characters from that golden age of Marvel. Someone's going to call me out on my use of the term golden age when I'm talking about comic books. I don't think that's quite right.
No doubt.
But it feels like the golden age of the Marvel comic books, that early 1960s time when both of these characters were created by, I think they're both Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, aren't they?
Yeah.
These two. And prime time for mad science, the 1960s, the Cold War. And I feel like those early Marvel comics were really focused on a lot of mad science and science fiction as the root of their characters and the powers that they had.
And feeding off a lot of stuff like Frankenstein and like those early mad science stories, which we looked at right at the beginning of this series, the kind of universal monster of it all of those kind of tales. And I think they share a bit of DNA with this in terms of the hubris of these scientists and the experiments gone wrong, the experiments they do on themselves, and the kind of characters they are.
So shall we make a start talking about Hulk, the first of our two superhero mad scientists?
Yeah, let's take it back to 2003 and Ang Lee's Hulk.
Maybe once you were my father. But you're not now and you never will be.
Is that so? Well, I got news for you. I didn't come here to see you. I came here to see my son. My real son. The one inside of you. You're nothing but a superficial shell. A husk of flimsy consciousness ready to be torn off at a moment's notice.
How long ago did you watch this film? Because I don't think I've revisited it since about 2010.
2010, okay, fair enough. I'd say it's been approximately 23 years since I saw this film at the cinema.
Wow. Okay.
And I don't think I've ever seen it again.
See, I had it on DVD.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was really swept up in those first few superhero films from Marvel that came out, because this came out, it must have come out after X-Men and after Spider-Man, and then they're jumping on the bandwagon yet again. They're making another Marvel film and trying to live up to those two, because X-Men and Spider-Man were really big, weren't they?
Yeah, huge. You had the Sony and Fox Marvel productions, and then I think this is Universal, isn't it, coming in with Hulk. So back in the day when it didn't matter that it was three separate unrelated studios making movies and licensing them, it just felt exciting that all these comic book characters were making these big modern movies. And yeah, X-Men and Spider-Man, those movies were huge, really good, really fun, successful, and becoming franchises. And then you're getting into like, okay, well, who else is there? You get a Hulk movie. A few years later, you're going to get your Fantastic Four movie, the kind of first blockbuster attempt at that franchise. And this is sitting in between those worlds of like blockbuster popcorn movies, and then you get Ang Lee coming onto the scene to adapt the Hulk, who's not so much of a action blockbuster guy. This is after Crouching Tiger, isn't it? Which is an action movie, but he's much more of an introspective director, isn't he?
Yeah, precisely that. I mean, if you look at Ang Lee's back catalogue, he did The Life of Pi, Crouching Tiger, like you said, Brokeback Mountain, and I think he was offered to make the Hulk or Terminator 3. So he had the choice of doing either of those.
Oh, was he? I didn't know that. Do you think he made the right choice?
I think he definitely made a choice. I don't know whether it's the right one or not. I mean, I don't know what an Ang Lee Terminator film would have looked like, but this version of the Hulk is definitely something of its own, I would say. And I think I didn't really have an appreciation of that as a teenager, when all I wanted was this big sort of blockbuster superhero film. And I think this has a lot more going on than just that. And they've taken this character that was popularized, I think, on screen from the Incredible Hulk TV show, that one that ran through the 70s and the 80s. For this to be the next sort of screen iteration of the Hulk, it's got some of that sort of DNA from there. You've got a few Easter egg appearances from people like Lou Ferrigno, who played the original Hulk back before it was CGI. And it's got all of those kind of things in there. But they really do play with the origin of the Hulk as well, and all of that kind of stuff, and give him a very Ang Lee backstory, I would say.
Yeah, and this film now is best known for being sort of weird and unsuccessful, and in the process maybe of being reappraised, or maybe that reappraisal process has kind of been and gone now a little bit, and it's better liked in retrospect than it was when it came out. Because I remember seeing it, I was fairly young, I went to the cinema, I didn't hate it, but I found it quite long and slow and a bit wacky and a bit weird, which, to be honest, I think a lot of that still stands. Rewatching it, but you know, there's definitely some interesting stuff in there, isn't there?
Do you think it's kind of wrestling with two different films? Like, is it two different films, this? Because it feels like, to me, it's got that superhero blockbuster stuff with the Hulk and all of the CGI stuff that's happening there, but then at the same time, it's got this quite introspective father and son trauma story that's going on.
Yeah, and I don't know a lot about the Hulk. Everything I know about the Hulk is from TV and film adaptations. So I've seen plenty of it. I've seen quite a lot of the old series when I was young, and then just stuff from the more recent, like, post-2000 films, including starting with this one. But I don't know anything about the comics and stuff. But my understanding is that there is quite a lot of, like, deep psychological lore for Bruce Banner in the comics. Like, a great deal of the character's backstory comes from a lot of the stuff that's going on in Bruce's head that he's wrestling with, and how it relates to the separation of Bruce and the Hulk, or the, you know, or the non-separation, the coming together of those two characters and the similarities. And this film, I think, is the only real adaptation that I've seen on screen that gets into some of that more interesting psychological stuff. But it's just few and far between, I guess, in the sort of 2 hours runtime. Whereas most of the film is, as you say, taken up with the kind of the big budget superhero movie action stuff. And then I'd also throw into the mix of the third thing going on, which is Ang Lee trying to do something interesting and different in the form and format of a comic book movie. You know, having panels on screen and doing weird and wacky stuff with how the screen is laid out. Some of it really interesting and successful, and some of it just, like, to be honest with you, just looking like clumsy and like errors in editing, like just getting stuff wrong. I think some of it just lands so badly that it looks like mistakes, really. So I think you've got a third thing in the mix there, which is just trying to do something a bit different with a comic book movie.
I think just to pick up on what you said a minute ago as well, that kind of the fracturing of Bruce Banner's mind and all of that kind of stuff that was kind of rooted in the comics. One of the interesting things about the comics as it goes on is there's lots of different iterations of the Hulk, which all seem to come from Bruce Banner. So as his personality kind of fractures, it has different Hulks that emerge from that, because you've got like the Savage Hulk, who is the sort of quintessential child-minded Hulk that we kind of know from most of the stuff that we see on screen and animated shows, all that kind of stuff. You've got a grey Hulk that appears at one point, who is smaller and weaker, but he's really intelligent, and he's usually a mob enforcer. And then
what?
Yeah, he works as like a mob enforcer and works in like casinos and stuff. And it's really funny. It's like little bits like that.
So, and does Bruce still get angry and then he transforms into a small...
a small grey Hulk? Well, the Hulk was grey originally. That was how he was drawn. And then later on, he became green for some reason. But then there's lots of other versions. There's like Professor Hulk, the one which you see in the later Avenger films, like the Smart Hulk, who's very articulate when Bruce has more control over him. But all of these different sort of fractured personalities that they've created different alter egos for. But the original Hulk was just all about this story about a man who is in an experiment trying to save one of his like lab assistants, a guy called Rick. And he gets caught in this gamma blast, and then that results in him becoming the Hulk when he gets angry. And then in this one, it's got all of this weird sort of inherited genetic experiment stuff that's going on with Bruce Banner from his dad, David Banner. David Banner being a callback to the name that they gave the Bruce Banner in the TV show to make things even more confusing, as like a little homage to that. But it's all inherited from his dad, this kind of experiments that his dad was doing on himself, and then this gamma radiation triggers it in Bruce in this story. So already they are making this incredibly more convoluted than the original story, where it's just a guy who is just trying to save someone and is in an accident, and then that's it, and he becomes the Hulk. So it seems really strange to me, the fact that they've gone, no, we're going to really make it about this trauma that he's had when he was younger, this kind of abusive father that he's had, and that already kind of puts it on its head. And all of that is stuff which I don't think I fully got when I watched it when I was a kid. And now I'm coming back to it. I'm like looking at this, and the stuff that Ang Lee and like the scriptwriters have put into this have completely changed the sort of the normal idea of the Hulk's creation.
Yeah, and to bring it back to the sort of mad science conversation, I think traditionally the adaptations of the Hulk would be along the Jekyll and Hyde mold, right? You've got a scientist who transforms into a more bestial persona who's much more violent, strong, chaotic. That's Mr. Hyde, and then you've got the really intelligent, sort of more reserved scientist character that he's transforming from, and showing this kind of duality of man thing. I do like that. I mean, that's obviously still here. Bruce gets angry. Bruce turns into the Hulk. That's your Incredible Hulk bread and butter, right?
Done.
But yeah, exactly. But then adding in this generational trauma business, which takes ages to play out, right? Like I understand the criticism, and I kind of still stand by it. And I know I recognize why I was bored by the film a little bit when I was watching it over 20 years ago. But like there is interesting stuff there with having a father creator figure who's a mad scientist, which brings out a lot more of the traditional Frankenstein stuff. So you've got both of these two massive mad scientist stories at play in this adaptation of it. You've got the father creator who turns his back on the creation and then kind of returns with guilt and, bringing nothing good along with him. while the character himself of Hulk is playing out like a Jekyll and Hyde story.
I think that's a really good point, the fact that they are merging that Frankenstein and that Jekyll and Hyde stuff together. And they're drawing on all these different inspirations to put this together. And like I said, they've got this, the generational trauma stuff going on, this kind of almost Greek tragedy I've heard it referred to as before. But in the same breath, they're trying to make this blockbuster superhero film. And they're also like, there's a really interesting choice from Ang Lee to make it look like a comic panel in some of the visuals. Yeah. So it's got split screen, it's got all of these sort of different windows going on and the different sorts of transitions into shots, all to make it feel like a comic book, which to me kind of makes it seem a bit cheesy. It didn't quite work for me because it just kind of took me away from what they were trying to do. They've already like got these two juxtapositions of the blockbuster stuff and the CGI Hulk, the superhero of it all, and then you've got this trauma story with all these weird introspective monologues going on throughout. And then in between that, like stitching it all together, you've got these weird comic book transitions which kind of take you out of it. And I just thought it was such a weird decision to put all of that together. How did you feel about that kind of like the visual look of it?
I didn't mind it at all. What you're describing, that putting interpretations of comic book paneling on the screen and doing that. I think that what goes along with that is that Ang Lee seems to be trying to create a bit of a unique visual language to supplement that almost. So I like the panels and how you'll see different bits of action or one thing will slide on. I particularly like it when there's some scenes where action like can transcend the panels on screen, like when they're hosing him down with like foam to sort of imprison him. The foam sprays out over some of the borders of the panels that have been on screen. That was like, oh, that's great. There's loads going on here. I really enjoyed all that stuff. What goes along with that is then kind of digitally enhanced panning in or zooming in quite a lot of the time that just feels like a weird editing choice. Sometimes he breaks the 180 line like within a scene, or even just there's a moment in the film where it just switches from one side of Jennifer Connelly's face to the other with nothing in between. And that doesn't feel like a comic book. That feels like bad filmmaking. I can't really like place it any other way, really. So I like the panels a lot, but I think that he's trying to do other stuff as well to supplement that and give it this sort of comic book on screen visual language that just doesn't land. So that's what makes the whole thing feel a bit weird and awkward and dissatisfying. But I do agree with you that it's weird, the paneling, and I do think it's a bit cheesy, and it's what I meant when I described it as wacky, but actually I sort of ultimately I quite like it.
Interesting. Because they do away with all of that as sort of Marvel progresses into this cinematic universe, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So they don't sort of draw back on those early comic influences, but it's such a deliberate choice in this one. I mean, there's lots of very deliberate choices in this. And you talk about wacky. Some of the experimentation explanations are quite wacky, aren't they? Like, do you fully understand what Bruce's dad, David Banner, is trying to achieve with his scientific experiments?
No, he was poking around with green critters in a montage, as best I can tell, in the start of the film, and making notes like, I intend to achieve human regeneration, and what has been passed on. It's a great montage. I love it. It's just, I mean, it's, again, like, talking about like a cheesy comic book kind of sequence. It's very cheesy. It really doesn't take itself too seriously, and there's just enough words thrown on screen to sort of explain what's going on. It really reminded me of, was it the Flubber opening sequence where it's just like the credits, like the cast and crew's names are coming on with like scientific formula type text scribbled around their names and stuff. And it was like, well, this means nothing, but it's setting me up with a feeling that kind of works for me. So it kind of landed in that same way. But yeah, I have no idea. He was messing around with like starfish and jellyfish, which have some regenerative capabilities. So I think it's along the lines of, what is it, the lizard, Dr. Connors from Spider-Man,
Yeah.
who was, I think he's doing stuff like that, trying to use like animal DNA that have from animals that have some sort of regenerative abilities, and then injecting it himself and just kind of messing around, really.
And amidst it all, he's working for the government, isn't he? At the
Yeah.
very start, he's doing all of this kind of experimentation to presumably do some sort of regeneration. But it all begins with this traumatic scene that it returns to later, doesn't it? With Bruce being a child and his mother and her last moments when his father kills his mother, which we find out later on, which is quite a dramatic thing to throw into the film. The fact that Nick Nolte's David Banner stabs his wife in front of his son, and that's part of the trauma that Bruce is carrying that somehow manifests into him turning into a big green monster.
Yeah, somehow. So
Somehow.
it's that plus regeneration experimentation plus massive blast of gamma radiation. It makes it all like quite, I don't know, hard work as a movie, doesn't it? Because I think we all accept that the gamma radiation backstory is fine. There was a gamma explosion. He turns into a big green guy. So it does, and it's such a well-trodden story that you know, even in 2003, it was extremely familiar to audiences. That it just feels, that's part of what makes the film feel so slow, isn't it? Because you're retreading that and also introducing a load more backstory. So it just feels like it takes ages for him to go green. But then it does allow for this more interesting psychological story running parallel to the mad science stuff. So you have this unique alchemy, don't you, of creating the Hulk, which is that he's both the victim of a mad science experiment and conducting his own kind of less mad science experiments that go wrong, and also this perfect cocktail of psychological damage to bring about a giant green monster.
Because somehow Bruce finds himself doing similar experiments to what his dad was doing back in the day, even though Bruce is adopted, so presumably has no connection to his family, biological family, and then somehow meets Betty Ross, who also just so happened to be on the same army base that he used to live on. So there's a few sort of jumps in logic going on there.
Yeah, which actually don't really amount to very much. There's a scene where Bruce and Betty go back to their childhood hometown, and Bruce says something like, "Oh, we must have known each other. We must have met." But that's just, I don't think that's mentioned again. Like, they didn't meet when they were kids, and I don't think they do have any sort of childhood connection apart from living in the same town. And, you know, their fathers have a connection. But I don't know, it seemed like having all of these like coincidences and connections that then don't always really play out and mean anything in the film.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on and a lot of strange stuff happens. But if we take it back to the experiment itself, and primarily that experiment that results in Bruce becoming the Hulk, what did you think about that transformation scene when it happens? Because we talked about transformation scenes throughout this series on Mad Science. What do you make of the Hulk's transformation?
I think it's fairly standard Jekyll and Hyde fare, really, isn't it? He gets increasingly mad and then a monster kind of breaks out of him. I think, when does it happen the first time? Is he receiving like a message from Betty and just getting increasingly angry and then he transforms? I think, is that the first transformation?
I think so. It's very late at night, isn't it? And yeah, I remember him going, because he gets angry over something and he's walking down the corridors and you just see his body start to inflate and his shirt buttons start to pop and he is becoming the Hulk in his little purple pants.
So that is classic Jekyll and Hyde stuff, I thought. But one thing that this film did really interestingly, so talking about Ang Lee, like putting in the more interesting psychological factors, there's like not quite enough of this in this film. But I absolutely love the idea of the Hulk being behind a door in his childhood home, in his memories, even before the Hulk enters the real world. The Hulk is like a psychological presence in Bruce's subconscious. So I think it's during that same transformation scene. It's he's remembering. He hasn't fully uncovered all of his memories, what happened to his mum, but he's having flashes of that scene. And in the same moments, there's that pounding from the door, behind which I think is his mum and dad having the argument. But when the door swings open, we just see the silhouette of the Hulk. So tying in the Hulk, this monster that exists in his mind as well as in reality, and in his mind as a representation of, the trauma and this unearthed memory of his parents and this tragic event. I absolutely love that. I could have done with a lot more of that. That you do get a bit more towards the end of the film, but the idea of the Hulk just being something that exists within his subconscious, unrelated to the gamma exposure that actually brings him out into the real world.
They do some really interesting stuff with that, don't they? Like the moment when he's wiping the mirror and Bruce sees himself as the Hulk, and doesn't the Hulk say one line to him?
He says puny human.
Puny human.
That same one. It's when he's wiping the mirror. I think he then smashes through the mirror and grabs him in his mind. So I could have done with a lot more of that, and I think it does feel a bit like Ang Lee's hands are a bit tied, because this is the really interesting stuff. But there's obviously a demand for quite a long scene where the Hulk is like throwing tanks around in the desert, whereas I do prefer some of this stuff, some of the clash between the Hulk and Banner in his own mind.
And I think because it is trying to do those moments of big superhero action, it doesn't really hit you in the same way that Marvel later learned the vocabulary of how to do these big blockbusters with their superheroes, don't they? So they've got moments in here where they're attempting it, like you say, when the Hulk is swinging around a tank and bits like that. But I mean, the villains in this, you don't really have many villains or many people that the Hulk's going up against. I mean, the first sort of villainous things that the Hulk fights are 3 different hulked up dogs, one of them being a poodle. Yeah. And that seems like a very weird choice. Yeah. And you see the Hulk literally pull them apart by the jaw, and then they sort of disappear into like a green puff of gas, don't they? It's a very strange scene.
Yeah, a very bad scene as well, isn't it? Like I think that's probably the low point of the film, isn't it? Like, and again, it's just like it just feels very forced. Like there was a need to have another action sequence, and this was kind of, I don't know, the best idea that was tabled. It makes narrative sense that his father has like sent something to attack him. I guess it makes narrative sense, but yeah, the use of the dogs, because the dogs are so weird. They're just like hanging around when he's posing as a janitor. Like there's a poodle just sitting in it's like a university campus or whatever, and it's not a very nice poodle, and it's all part of his extended experimentation that he's carried on in secret after his disappearance. But yeah, I mean it's a big part, I think, of why people don't remember this film fondly, because you're going to remember that scene, aren't you? It looks pretty crappy and extremely cheesy, and it's memorable for all the wrong reasons, unfortunately. So you're not going to remember interesting little snippets of the Hulk pounding on a door in Bruce's mind when there's like a 20-minute sequence where he fights 3 giant dogs that explode in puffs of green.
I mean, that's a big takeaway from this film, that entire moment.
Yeah, I mean, the film is kind of all over the place, isn't it? That's the problem. I think that's why it's remembered not so fondly. I think the reason people have reappraised it is because you go back to it and you go, it's not all dog fighting and tank swinging. There's some really interesting psychological stuff, but the fact of the matter is the dog fighting and the tank swinging is still a huge part of the runtime of the film. So you can't just say like, oh, it's a really interesting movie because some of this psychological stuff is in there. It's like both interesting and kind of boring and trite at the same time.
It can be all those things at the same time.
Yeah, and it
definitely.
absolutely is.
Yeah.
And it's wacky and mad, and it's got comic book panels on screen and weird editing choices.
And it's also got that a lot of the themes from our Mad Science series run through this. One of the ones which I was picking up on was the idea of like science for sale, and the sort of the bureaucratic nature of the military wanting to take over these experiments and control them. I mean, there was literally like a salesman from the army coming to try and buy Bruce's experiments at one point. So I thought that was another interesting part of this, the whole idea of the military trying to take ownership over this mad science.
Yeah, and the Banner family has heritage in that, don't they? Because that's David's career, basically, albeit with a kind of 60s/70s kind of counterculture. He does what he wants. He works for the military, yes, but he's also a bit of a maniac who can't really be constrained by the military. But he's got this history of working within those constraints within the family.
And again, it's that weaponizing of science, isn't it? That they're trying to do. They're trying to weaponize the Hulk. They're trying to weaponize what Bruce and David are doing with these experiments. Again, we have scientists experimenting on themselves. So David Banner continues experiments on himself towards the end of it, once he finds out how Bruce's body is responding to the gamma radiation. He tries and uses it himself, and then gains his own weird superpowers, which are kind of come out of nowhere.
Yeah, he has his own Jekyll and Hyde transformation scene, doesn't he? I was actually really reminded of the T-1000. There's some really cool special effects, actually, when David has his transformation sequence, because he has some sort of... I mean, his powers are very hard to follow. They don't even really track with the montage about regeneration, do they? Because he can then turn into whatever substance he touches, I guess, which doesn't track at all with what I understood from the beginning of the movie. But that's what he can do. But it's very T-1000-esque, isn't it? He plunges his hand into like a metal railing, and his forearm becomes kind of blue-grey metal, the same as that, and he has to like wrench it free. There's a very satisfying sort of motion that he makes with his arm, and the sound that goes along with it, a kind of crunching, sliding of metal it's moving through it. I like that a lot. I thought that was a really cool sequence.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting they've chosen him to give him these powers as well, because those are powers from a different character associated with Hulk as well. He's called the Absorbing Man, and he's like a regular character who pops up now and again. And he has this ability to absorb the properties of anything that he touches. So that's exactly what David Banner gets in this. So they've sort of replaced him with that character to give it more of a reason to be there, rather than just having this random Absorbing Man pop in. We'll just make him the dad. So again, they're twisting this kind of like the Marvel story of it, which I think is fine in most aspects. But Marvel fanboys are going to be like, what's going on here? You've changed up the entire story.
Yeah.
Can we just strip it back a bit?
Yeah. I'm sure that would have pissed a lot of people off. But that was all fair game back in 2003, wasn't it? We hadn't laid down the rules of Marvel filmmaking. Is Bruce's father, has he got superpowers in the comics, or is he just an abusive father and that's his role, or does he gain superpowers?
I am not too familiar with his backstory, to be honest. I don't know if he crops up that much. I think he does have an abusive father, but I may be wrong. But it's nothing about this whole experimentation on him when he was younger. I do think he finds that out later on. There's some sort of trauma which he links back to his Hulk self.
But he's not like popping up as a regular villain with superpowers to like cause problems for the Hulk. And
there's been a lot of comics that could have happened.
Yeah,
it's probably happened at some point by now. But then when they have their kind of showdown towards the end, it's a very moody father-son argument, isn't it? They have this moment where they're just sat opposite each other and they're kind of having it out. And Bruce is crying And Nick Nolte's character is getting really agitated by it all until he starts absorbing his powers.
It's good Nick Nolte stuff, isn't it? I mean, he's really chewing the scenery throughout this film, and he's a lot of fun. I mean, I wasn't that into the kind of like father and son stuff. I thought, because they don't have a very believable relationship. I don't think the two actors, but I like it when Nick Nolte can be unrestrained, when he just stands up and like bites on a big cable and electrifies himself. That was fun. I enjoyed that bit.
Yeah.
Because I like how good Nick Nolte is at being just crazy and weird, basically. And then it just descends into total madness, I guess, for the rest of the film. They fight through some clouds and all the powers are going crazy, and they kind of dissolve each other into a giant mushroom cloud of consciousness. I like all of that stuff a bit more than the kind of father and son emotional showdown, I guess. What about you? Did you find that satisfying? The two scientists facing off inside a science experiment.
It was a choice. Again, the whole film's a choice. It was an interesting way to have your protagonist and your villain have that showdown. But I do think I perked up when I saw the big fight between them towards the end. So yeah, that was like a big moment. But yeah, it's such a weird one, this entire film, to kind of get your head around, because it's fighting with itself with all these different themes, trying to put it all together. And it's got a multitude of cast members in there. It's very centered around Eric Bana's Hulk and Nick Nolte's Banner as well. But there is also like characters like General Ross, who played by Sam Elliott, who crops up, Jennifer Connelly playing Betty. But all those other characters kind of get pushed to the side in favor of this father and son traumatic relationship and all of the trauma that Bruce has been dealing with. So it comes down to father and sons with this. And I think the next film we're talking about has this kind of parental relationship in it as well, which is kind of like a father and son relationship again.
Okay, well, let's move on and talk about the first film in the MCU series, Iron Man, from 2008. Hi listeners, hope you're enjoying the show. If you want to support us and get access to hundreds of hours of bonus episodes, you can sign up to our Patreon.
We've got discussions on all the latest sci-fi films in cinemas, the Bad Movie Bunker, and Patrons' Picks, as well as mini-series covering your favourite franchises.
Patrons get to have their say on what we cover, both over on Patreon and right here on the main show too.
So if you want to join, head over to patreon.com/Journey Through Sci-Fi.
Now, back to the episode.
It's impossible.
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm not Tony Stark.
Do you remember this film coming out, James? Did you go and see it at the cinema? I bet you did.
I don't know if I saw it at the cinema, Did I see it at the cinema? I can't remember. 2008. We would have been at university. So maybe I was busy partying it up at university.
I thought you were going to say studying.
Definitely not
Called you
studying.
out.
Yeah. Watching films for my film studies course. Yeah. That's exactly what I was
Sleeping
doing.
in the screening room where we were supposed to watch films for the film studies course.
Such a waste. And now all we do is talk about films.
Yeah. Should have paid more attention. I definitely saw this at the cinema. I remember it really well. I remember that it was the same year that The Dark Knight came out, so it was a real high watermark of good comic book movies, and I just absolutely loved it when it came out. I thought it was just brilliant, just great fun, just a perfect action movie, perfect comic book movie. Doesn't take itself too seriously, but is serious about being good entertainment. And it's mad to look back at it now, like decades later, and everything that's come since. And, just thinking that Quantum Mania exists in the same fictional storyline as this film, it's all, and they're all directly connected. And yeah, it's just a really interesting thing to go back to after so long.
And this was a real shot in the dark, wasn't it? Because like we said at the start of this episode, nobody really knew much about this character of Iron Man before this film, I would say, unless you knew about Marvel Comics and the Marvel superheroes and all that kind of stuff.
He had a one-season cartoon in the same
in the
world
90s.
as Spider-Man, X-Men. Obviously, only one season, so nowhere near as successful as Spider-Man and X-Men. But that was all in one universe, I think, wasn't it? They had crossover episodes between those series. So that's how I knew Iron Man. But I don't even think I was a fan of that cartoon. I liked Spider-Man and X-Men and didn't really get into Iron Man.
You see, I watched Iron Man as part of the Marvel Action Hour that they had over here on the BBC.
Oh, I don't remember
so so they'd put together, I think, Fantastic Four, Iron Man, and the Hulk, like the old Hulk animated series, and they'd put them all together, and it was an hour's worth of cartoons from Marvel,
Nice.
which they broadcast, and I think I saw Iron Man through that.
So, okay, that's interesting. I don't remember that at all, and I don't like those three. I didn't like Fantastic Four either. So, was Spider-Man and X-Men not on the BBC? Was that somewhere else? Because I did watch them.
It did get shown on the BBC as well, but they were standalone episodes. So they would just be on normally. And they're also on like Fox or Nickelodeon if you had Sky. I think it must have been Fox if you had Sky, Fox Kids.
But that's relevant to the sort of prominence of the character, isn't it? You say they're standalone episodes because audiences wanted to watch standalone episodes, whereas with Iron Man, it has to be bundled in with other products. It was clearly just, a second stringer, not as interesting as those other characters and not as big with audiences.
Yeah, so then we find ourselves in 2008 and director Jon Favreau has been charged with putting this to screen, with making this film for Iron Man, and they cast Robert Downey Jr., who is very controversial at the time due to his past, but Jon Favreau wants to center this around Robert Downey Jr. because he feels like it reflects this kind of redemption arc that he wants to show in this character of Tony Stark. And Robert Downey Jr. goes on to become this massive star from this film, doesn't he? He kind of gets like his career kind of has this big resurgence due to this and becomes this really iconic character of Iron Man. Now, when this first comes out, what were your feelings about Robert Downey Jr.? Did you know much about him? Did you know much about Jon Favreau?
Well, Jon Favreau was Monica's boyfriend in Friends.
That's how
and
you
I've
know.
never really been able to get over that. Just the idea that that character then goes on to, launch the biggest movie franchise of all time in the real world. I've never really been able to get over that. And then as far as Robert Downey Jr. goes, I think probably in 2008, I hadn't seen any films with him in, or if I had, I wasn't like aware of him as an actor. He's in, I'm actually just scanning through his filmography now, and he's in Natural Born Killers, which I reckon I probably did see at uni, maybe before Iron Man, but not, wouldn't like necessarily remember him in particular from it. And he's in a Charlie Chaplin biopic that I think I might have seen, and Bowfinger. I've seen these films. But I don't remember Robert Downey Jr. from it. So this put him into my consciousness, I guess.
And I think it's got to do with this character of Tony Stark that he's playing as well. And this story, this mad science story that they're doing of this rich, reckless scientist who is more like a tech bro than perhaps the other scientists we've looked at previously, and how he becomes this grounded superhero.
Yeah, it's interesting from the mad science perspective, isn't it? Because he's not really a mad scientist. We've talked a lot about this over the series, haven't we? About the difference between a mad scientist and a scientist who is doing mad science stuff, right? Like, he's not a mad scientist. He's just a real bastard. He's got legitimate scientific credentials, but he's an arms dealer and proud of it, and a billionaire playboy dickhead. But he's humbled, obviously by the experiences of the movie, and then he's forced into a situation where he has to become a mad scientist and create this creation in a cave from a box of scraps to fight his way out, and then ultimately become Iron Man. And then you get into some more interesting stuff about his relationship to the science, but he's not coming at it from that kind of hubristic perspective. I think there is some hubris in Tony Stark, but it's not directly linked to his experiment because it's very he's on the back foot when he's creating this mad science creation that is the Iron Man suit.
And he's creating something out of necessity, isn't he? He's creating something that can keep him alive. And then after that, that becomes this Iron Man suit that he creates to kind of get him out of this cave, get him out of this situation. So it's a different kind of experiment that kicks everything off as opposed to the Hulk, where he's experimented on himself and it's an accident. This hasn't happened on purpose. Everything that he's doing is on purpose. And it's kind of it's a change in the use of his science as well, because he is known for being basically a creator of weapons. So he's a warmonger. People refer to him as that throughout the film and all this kind of stuff. He's an arms dealer, but he has this kind of revelation when he has this near-death experience, and he uses his brain, his incredible brain and his science to create something that can save him and can also sort of change the use of his technology.
Yeah, but then he does almost immediately start to go into that mad scientist archetype from that point on, doesn't he? Like he has an underground lab. Now it's beautiful and all made of glass and full of sports cars and restored sports cars, and it's obviously, there's billions of dollars behind it, but it is this subterranean place where he can descend to, away from the world, away from the beautiful cliff top stunning house above, and kind of cover himself in his experiments and become a tinkerer, basically. Just get really obsessed with the Iron Man suit and just making version upon version of it, and just kind of cutting himself off from the world in order to become obsessed with this experiment that he was forced to create out of necessity, but then I guess tied in with the trauma of the experiences that he had when he was held captive, kind of affects him in that way. And yeah, he does become more like the archetype, I think, of a mad scientist that we've seen.
Because he becomes more obsessive about it, doesn't he?
Yeah,
he can't stop working on this suit. He wants to figure it out. He wants to see all the things that he could potentially do with this arc reactor that he creates. All of that becomes his focus. But also, you talk about him being the sort of more like the sort of archetypal version of a scientist, like a mad scientist we've seen. I think they also flip it because they make him a very cool character, don't they? He's suave, he's charming, he's mega rich, he's funny. He is a bit of like he's a dick when it first starts, and he continues to be a bit of a dick. But that's part of the reason you like him in this, because he's cracking jokes. He's still incredibly charismatic and likable, but he is this kind of like bad boy tinkerer, isn't he?
Yeah, so he never fully fits into the archetype, does he? Because he has all of the social skills that we don't traditionally associate with a mad scientist. I don't know why I've got flubber on the brain today, but again, I was reminded,
Sounds like a problem you should get seen to.
Yeah, but the way that he is just sort of destroying everything in the garage and in his lab, that really reminded me of the Robin Williams interpretation of that. In the remake of that, where he's just destroying everything in sight and the flubber gets out of hand and he's very wacky. But contrasting the two characters, yeah, Tony Stark has all of these just social skills of a billionaire playboy that we don't tend to see with other mad scientists that we looked at.
And the development of his mad science is really fun as well, isn't it? Because it, like you said, it starts in this cave where he's making this suit out of scraps, and then he goes one step further when he gets home and he turns it into this hot rod looking suit that he's had painted and made exactly to fit, like one of his expensive suits that you would wear normally.
Yeah.
So he's gone from this cave version that he's created to this new one. And also it's interesting because going back to the Marvel comics of it all, that's how the original Iron Man looked. He looked like the creation, the Mark I that he creates in the cave. And then later, as the comics went on, he got this Iron Man suit and they did the red and the yellow. So again, they're kind of tracking this development
Right.
But it feels more grounded, doesn't it? It feels more realistic the way they depict it in this. And I think that's part of the reason when we watched like the Hulk and you've got this sort of loose CGI character that doesn't quite seem as real. When you come to something like Iron Man, it's more grounded in an actual reality. It seems more feasible in some ways, doesn't it? Because he's a guy who's invented a suit that can make him fly, and that's what he's doing. There's more of a grounded science in this, and it's less fantastical in that way, which I think is why this was such a good one to sort of kick off this Marvel universe, because people can get on board with it a little bit easier than perhaps something like the Hulk.
Yeah, or like launching in with Quantumania. Yeah, I agree with you definitely. But also, there's something about the presentation of it. Just the special effects in this film are amazing. I don't think they've aged a day. It looks brilliant. So much money has been thrown at this film to make that feel believable. So it's not just like a believable story about a rich man using his basically unlimited wealth to become a superhero, but actually what we see of him becoming the superhero is very believable. It's as a sci-fi fan, just watching it, I don't know about you, but it's absolutely irresistible watching the suit manufacturing scenes. Did you watch this IMAX enhanced on Disney?
Maybe.
I think it's the default. If you just hit play on Disney Plus, I think it's the default. But that, I think, is the first sequence. Oh, probably in the opening sequence, it's IMAX format, but it pops into IMAX the first time the red and gold suit, I think, or the silver suit, the first one that's assembled onto Tony's body, that sequence, it pops out into IMAX, and it's great. It's just a great scene. There's a level of detail and technology at work on screen that as a sci-fi fan I find pretty irresistible. I mean, it's extremely fetishized, isn't it? The sort of the manufacturing elements, but I do think it looks great and it's really good fun to watch. I think it's more fun than any of the flying around, any of the shooty action sequences, but seeing the suit just get put on Tony is absolutely brilliant.
Because that's the thing with these superhero films, isn't it? Because every origin story they have, what you're building up to is the moment where they are that character, where they are that superhero. So in the Hulk, you want to see the transformation scene. In this, you want to see Tony like create the suit. But I think with this, like you're saying, because there's so much development in how he creates that and all of the fun sort of little scenes that they have and set pieces whilst he's creating it, that is part of the fun, because you know it's getting to that point and we don't need to see him fully in his suit because he's already got bits of it on and you can see the development of it. And I think that's a really interesting way of putting this superhero on screen, by building up to that big moment where he's going to fly around and he's going to fight someone, all this kind of stuff. But for this, it's kind of more interesting to watch him develop it.
Yeah, and that suiting up moment for a superhero is always really important. Most iconic superheroes have an iconic suiting up sequence in their movies, or sort of a catchphrase or a style of doing it in the comics or something like that. And I think there's mad science heritage to that, isn't there? You have creation scenes. We've seen tons of creation scenes. Anything that's in the Frankenstein kind of heritage has a birthing scene for the creation in the films, or if it's kind of more on the Jekyll and Hyde side of things, then it's a transformation scene. And we've got examples of both today, haven't we? We've got a Jekyll and Hyde transformation, and we've got a kind of it's still on the transformation side, I guess, but it's the suiting up in a superhero thing. I think it has that kind of heritage to mad science movies.
And as we're sort of leading up to this suiting up, we're also spending more time with Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark. And I think there is something about Robert Downey Jr.'s performance in this, the kind of improvisational nature of it. And from what I can gather, a lot of the script wasn't finished when they were making this. They went straight into production and they were kind of having to do it a bit ad hoc. And stuff like the scene at the end where you get Nick Fury pop up and they sort of set up that there's going to be the Avengers. All that stuff was put in after the fact. And a lot of it was just kind of them seeing where they would go with the film and having Robert Downey Jr. improvise stuff, which I think Jeff Bridges did as well. I think he was improvising in turn to kind of like mirror his style, because the two of them have a very interesting dynamic throughout this. And I sort of implied that it was a bit father-son, wasn't it? And it does feel like they've got this father-son relationship throughout.
Yeah, and Tony's real father kind of looms large, doesn't he? There's this inherited kind of mad science background that Tony has to wrestle with, and then Obadiah is the kind of surrogate father figure that's actually in his life. And much like Bruce, he has to deal with that, and he becomes the bad guy of the movie.
Yeah, he uses that same technology that Tony has to become a villain. So again, you see this sort of the parental character stealing the powers from the other, like the main protagonist, and then becoming the villain by the end of it. But also their motivations are different, and they change throughout, don't they? Because Obadiah just wants to make money and just wants to make the biggest toys, the biggest weapons, and sell those. But Tony has this change of heart due to that experience, that traumatic experience that he has when he's captured and almost dies. So you see this kind of this cavern develop between the two of them as they go along their different paths.
Yeah, they both had this mad obsession, don't they? They're both mad scientists in that way, although I don't think Obadiah really has the kind of intelligence to really qualify as one, but they're both driven by this increased obsession. And for Tony, it's like mission after mission, putting himself in more and more danger, whereas for Obadiah, it's basically trying to control and stop Tony and oust him, isn't it? But they both have this kind of parallel obsession that has to come to a head and has to end in the fight, which works really well. I mean, just in terms of like structuring the movie and comparing it to Hulk, right? I just think that works really well because it's all kind of tied up in the narrative instead of feeling like, oh, well, there has to be like a military chase sequence, so we're just going to have the Hulk escape and have 20 minutes of action like that. Whereas the reason I think this film is such a successful introduction to a massive franchise is that all of that stuff works together in the narrative really well to satisfying effect.
What do you think about the tone of this? Because it's that first Marvel film that really uses that humor in a very interesting way. I mean, you get it in Spider-Man previously, but with this and Robert Downey Jr.'s performance, I think they really lean into the humor of this alongside the action, and that kind of becomes the blueprint of the Marvel films that come afterwards, because they do try and make a few sort of darker ones as they go on, but this one seems to hit the kind of magic formula that they'll go on to try and replicate throughout the subsequent however many Marvel films that they've done now. They try and have this mix of humor, action, and they've still got a few sort of sad, poignant moments in this. There are some tragic things that happen to kind of spur on the action. Like we lose characters in this. There's the Doctor who Tony's working with in the cave. He's killed off, and that's quite a dramatic moment. How do you feel about the kind of like the tone of this and the way that Jon Favreau is kind of weaving it all together?
I don't know. I think it's a great template, isn't it? And I think that it just gives, like you say, it just gives you a little bit of everything. And I think that that's why they've tried to repeat it so many times over the course of a couple of decades, because it just works as a kind of perfect blockbuster formula, really, doesn't it? I mean, what do you think? Do you think that continuing to try and emulate that is the right thing? Or do you think that they should have just tried to do something totally different every time they make an MCU movie?
I think some of the more interesting ones are the ones where they've taken a bit of a risk and they've gone down a different route. I think,
like what?
Well, I think when you look at stuff like WandaVision, that was different to anything they'd done previously. And when they kind of give it a different style, I mean, they've tried doing this. They tried doing it with the Fantastic Four film and setting it in this kind of weird 50s alternative universe. And they've tried to do little things which kind of give it a bit of variation. But I think it is difficult because what people want from these superhero films is that kind of formula to an extent. It's just when that formula is run dry, then you need to try and look at ways you can make things a bit different. Like Ang Lee's Hulk could have been like a Greek tragedy, could have really lent into that. But because it's trying to be both things, it doesn't quite work. So it's a very difficult formula to get, and I don't have a like definitive answer on how you get that right. But I think it does get to a point like we talk about superhero fatigue quite a lot.
Yeah.
And it feels like that is partly due to them trying to take this template and use it again and again and again. And then we've seen umpteen movies with the same formula and the same things going on, but they don't quite have that kind of magic, that magic that they're capturing in this, because it was so different at the time, and it just kind of ticks all the boxes for what you want from a superhero film.
Yeah. I mean, it's all template, isn't it? I think, and that's why it works, because it was the first one. And then everything else just tries to map onto that template. So you're right, they try to do interesting stuff, and there have been like attempts to do that, like the Sam Raimi one that came out, the Doctor Strange one that came out, I thought was really interesting, but it was mapping Sam Raimi's really interesting visual style, mapping that onto a pre-existing template. And yeah, Fantastic Four, they're like, okay, well, what if it was in a kind of 1960s retro-futuristic alternate universe, but again, filtered through the same template they've been using since 2008. I think that's where it becomes a problem, is that you can't actually do anything interesting if you are forever married to that template, which I think they probably are. So that I think causes problems. Whereas there's nothing mapped onto this. It's a pretty very straight down the line, simple action blockbuster, which, as you say, does a little bit of humor, does a little bit of pathos, does a little bit of sadness, but mostly it's just straightforward, light but well-produced action throughout.
And I think there is something in the fact that Tony Stark is a realistic kind of character. You can picture this kind of scientist. These kind of people exist in the world. Maybe they're not creating Iron Man suits, but maybe they're creating something else, and they've got loads of money and they're philandering and doing all this kind of stuff. But I think the identity that Tony Stark has is incredibly familiar. And then also, like, in terms of like the identity of the character, the fact that he goes that one step further and he has that kind of mad scientist hubris to be like, oh, I am Iron Man. Like, this is me. This creation, I've done this. Look at me. He's got that slight God complex to him. As much as he's changed, he still wants the glory that every mad scientist wants.
Do you think that's him embracing being a mad scientist by the end of the movie?
I think so. I think he wants his props for what he's created. Yeah. Because he wants people to know it's him. He doesn't want it to be, oh, this is my bodyguard. He doesn't like that backstory. He wants everyone to see, oh, Tony Stark's like really clever, and he's made this suit, and he's now saving the world and doing all of this stuff. He's changed. He wants that glory.
And isn't that ultimately the main thing that we have seen in almost every single mad scientist, is that he wants the world to see that he's smart? That's such a core thing of a mad scientist, isn't it? Just going to extreme lengths, doing weird stuff, putting themselves and others in danger, but ultimately wanting the world to acknowledge that he is a smart person.
And that's another interesting aspect to when they do build the Avengers up. You get Mark Ruffalo's Hulk meeting Iron Man. So you get these two characters meeting, and they're very different kinds of scientists. So you get that meeting of the minds, but there is just something about Tony Stark and Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal of him that just fits so naturally into this mad scientist hubris, which we keep banging on about every episode.
Yeah, I think he is a good example of it, and certainly within the MCU. And it's interesting that the MCU kind of sprang out of this mad science, and it's kind of now encompasses all possible genres of science fiction and fantasy and everything in between. But it kind of springs out of this core mad science story.
Before we wrap up on Iron Man, what do you think about Robert Downey Jr. returning to the MCU as Doctor Doom? And is that going to take away from his performance as Iron Man, do you think? I mean, I don't know what the hell's going on with that yet. None of us do until that Doomsday film comes out.
Yeah.
But do you think that's going to take away from the legacy of this particular character?
I don't think it will take away from the legacy of anything. I think, if I don't necessarily buy into the idea that sequels and remakes and reboots can sort of retroactively impact the quality or the enjoyment of a previous film. I'm someone who enjoys the Highlander franchise, for example. So, I obviously don't buy into that.
You've got taste.
Yeah. But I just think it's sort of the clearest possible sign that the snake is eating itself at Marvel, right? The template has totally run out of steam, and there's just a sense of desperation in recasting Robert Downey Jr. and bringing him back after all of that. Everything post Endgame has felt a little bit desperate. It was perfect blockbuster end of franchise stuff, Endgame. It was great fun and a great way to send off quite a lot of characters. And then they're just like, well, what if we kept on putting Robert Downey Jr. and everything because he was at the start of it and everybody loves him. So it may well turn out to be good and I may well enjoy his performance, but I think there's a real desperation there. Are you excited to see him as Dr. Doom?
I'm interested to see what they do with it. I think I can't tell how it's going to work out at this moment. I think having him back as Doctor Doom kind of takes away from that character for me. But they're going to do
which character? From Tony Stark or from
I think
Doom?
From Doctor Doom as well, because Doctor Doom's another mad scientist. He's
a good character, isn't he?
Yeah.
And it feels like we're not really getting Doctor Doom, we're getting Robert Downey Jr. specifically.
Yeah. So it's going to be like a variation of Iron Man, who is now Doctor Doom, which seems like a bit of a cop-out. And
there'll be lots of time taken up with how does Bruce react to that when he sees who it is, and all of this. They've got to play all of that out. And this is all because of Jonathan Majors fucking everything up in the real world.
Well, we'll have to wait to find out about that. But if you want to hear us chatting about Endgame, you can go back into the archive and listen to our time travel series. We did a whole episode where we covered that and the mad time travel that was going on in that film.
Good plug, James. Should we do any other plugs?
Oh, yes. I think it's about plug time, isn't it?
Yes. If you've enjoyed today's episode, thank you for listening. Do subscribe to hear more and head on over to whatever social media you're on. We're probably there if you search Journey Through Sci-Fi, or come to our website, journeythroughsci-fi.com.
And if you want a free and easy way to support the podcast, why not leave us a review and leave us a comment? It's a quick and easy way to help new listeners discover the show, and you'd be doing us a favour, so please do.
On top of covering Endgame in our time travel series, we've covered a few superhero movies over on Patreon. We did the Fantastic Four movie from 2015 in the Bad Movie Bunker. And I think we did do Quantumania.
We definitely did.
The Patreon feed. So if you're interested in hearing those episodes, head on over to patreon.com/Journey Through Sci-Fi for bonus content and to support the show.
Next time here on the main podcast feed, we will be going a little darker than we have been. We're taking it from superheroes to weird experiments. What films will we be looking at to cover that, Matt?
We will be discussing mad scientists who kidnap their victims and to experiment on them. We are watching The Human Centipede from 2009 and Kevin Smith's Tusk from 2014.
It's going to be disgusting.
So join us for that. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back with you soon.
Bye.